I may be dating myself a bit here, but I'm proud to say that I got to grow up in what many consider to be the golden age of gaming. This includes series like Halo, Gears of War, Super Mario, and even my all-time favorite, The Legend of Zelda. But alas, it appears as time has progressed, a new generation of gaming has finally come forward from the horizon, and it's starting to reveal an ugly face beneath the mask. Still, during this new and somewhat foreign territory, there is plenty of fun to be had, and I have hope that maybe things are just in a stage of a necessary evil in efforts to get all of that bad juju out of its system. We may not all like the same games, but we do agree on one thing. We love playing them. Lately, the gaming community has been in shambles with the way that some of our beloved franchises have been handled. It's sort of starting to feel like this is a bigger problem than ourselves, and there's not much we can do about it. Or so we thought. Video gaming is my favorite pastime. I mean, here I am scripting and recording a whole video just to talk about how great they are. Hell, even you're just here to listen to yet another rando yap for a hot minute about video games. Which means you and I have something in common. A passion for gaming. But lately, we've been witnessing some of the most controversial moments in gaming history. Rewards that used to be locked behind achieving a certain goal within the game are now replaced by more than what's just a few bucks these days. The original theme of this video was to talk about what makes a video game good or bad. But as I sought out to learn more about this topic, I realized that there is just something more than the technicality of what makes a video game good or not. And I couldn't help but notice that some of these games have started to feel like the intention wasn't necessarily to captivate the audience, but to instead see which one can do the most numbers. Sure, a game can visually look great, sound even better, and even have solid controls, but for some reason, that doesn't seem to account for the main component that every truly good video game has, the impact it has on the player. Before we move forward, I do think it's important to note that in order to tackle the contents of this video, some of you might end up with your feathers in a ruffle, and that's okay with me. There are so many opinions and perceptions within the gaming community, it'd be insane not to expect that. So if you hear anything that makes you go, then I of course welcome you to duke it out with the other bros in the comments down below. Now, to give you an idea of what I'm trying to get at, I want to show you an example of what a good game looks like in my eyes, so I'm going to kick this baby off with a banger.
Sasa and the Lost Demon.
I guess I can take this moment to be on theme and refer to my childhood memories of wanting to be a video game reviewer, because this game took me back to a much simpler time, and I want to share the experience that I had with it. Don't worry, I'll make it short. This game opens up in such an elegant way with its enchanting music and gorgeous art style in a way that I haven't felt in a while. The game doesn't take too long with its tutorial, and it didn't really need to. With that being said, what are some of the traits in this game that has me so intoxicated with its presentation, to be a bit more specific? Well, I know this varies for most gamers, but personally, when I boot up a video game, I want to be as immersed in its world as possible, especially in order to fully enjoy what the devs were trying to create. Which means whenever a game does that thing where it seamlessly goes from like title to gameplay in a smooth way, that's bonus points for me. It's not to say that a loading screen isn't welcome, but a streamlined transition is way more appreciated. Another thing I realized would be important to note is when you first start playing a game, you always hit a point of realization that you actually have to learn how to play the game. This means it's time for a tutorial. If you've been playing games for a while, you'll know that most control schemes are generally the same, with the left stick being your main movement for input, your right stick being how you look around your surroundings, and then the buttons are kind of similar or varying differently, but they can vary differently depending on what game you're playing. But when you think about this, it's actually kind of easy to mess this up. And luckily that doesn't happen all too often these days. And this is especially true when devs were first beginning to navigate like the 3D space of gaming. Well, to tie that back into the game we're talking about, you'll be pleased to hear that they decided to go with a new control scheme, and it fit perfectly with the concept of the game. You see, before you unlock the ability to use Cheshire, your companion, throughout the game, you temporarily get used to just using the left stick to control Cereza, as you have no other to control. But when you finally do get to control your new companion, it feels kind of weird for a second, but once you get through the little test that the game sets up for you to get accustomed to, it clicks pretty much intuitively. And when you think about that, it fits perfectly with the game's gameplay mechanic. You see, you are originally one person, and then you suddenly have gained some sort of control of a totally different person, albeit you are the source of their energy. Your controls of them are as limited as expected, while also causing the ability to focus on controlling yourself simultaneously is limited as well. And as the game progresses, you become more confident in what you and your companion are capable of. Kind of made me realize this game would have been perfect for co-op. Like, oh my god, what a missed opportunity. After playing the game for the first time, after a while, I said to myself, verbally, out loud, this feels like it'd be kind of fun with another person controlling one of the characters. So I decided to have my girlfriend control Cereza while I got to control Cheshire, and holy shit, the experience was almost perfect. Everything just played so well, and it was pretty entertaining with a second person in the mix, apart from interacting with certain things and then the menus and navigating them. But I still had fun and really wish they had designed the game with that in mind. They did it for Super Mario Odyssey, and it almost feels like they did have it in mind and just decided to like cut it out at the last second and lock out the beans to any kind of co-op ever. Nonetheless, that doesn't take away from the experience of the game. Next, the entirety of the game was visually sound. I mean, there wasn't a single moment where I wasn't wowed at how beautifully crafted everything was. They made everything feel like you had just sat down next to a fireplace and got all cozied up and ready to read that weird storybook you've been eyeballing, yet physically allowed to interact with the story and truly experience it through the best medium possible. The hand-drawn watercolor backdrops were gorgeous, and the character art and font they decided to go with stitch everything together so well, especially considering the story of the character that they were trying to tell. Making a game look like that couldn't have been easy, considering the fact that there were so many people involved, yet they still managed to release a coherent aesthetic. Not only was the imagery excellent, but the sound design was just mwah. The soundtrack for this game was so good you had no choice but to take it into account. It was the velvet lining delicately wrapped around the final product and made everything truly flow together in a way that's similar to a damn Disney movie, but like better. The type of music they chose to showcase during specific sets and scenes tells me that they truly cared for this game's success, and not simply for the point of making money, but to truly have us witness a masterpiece. The sounds of woods as you traverse through Avalon Forest, mixed with the music and wonderfully voiced storylines throughout its adventure, is fully fledged what I'm looking for when I'm playing a new game, especially in a genre that I don't usually play and I'm using as a means to take a break from what I'm used to. There's so much more I want to talk about within this game, but I don't want to get too far gone, and I may as well let you experience it if you haven't yet. That being said, I do want to take a quick moment to say thanks to Abebe Tinyari, the game's director, Tomiko Nishi, the art director, and Yusuke Konishi, the lead sound designer, and of course the rest of the team at Platinum Games. Thanks. This game is without question a 10 out of 10 for me, and I'd argue that for most of the people that played it, they'd likely agree. Which is why it's so strange this game isn't more popular. I get that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I can't help but feel like the concept of how well this game was put together isn't showing up on people's radars nowadays. Which brings me to my next point. Video games have a weird problem. The game I just went over didn't need to have amazing graphics or an insane budget with bombastic promises in order to have me in a chokehold like a Popeye's biscuit. No. But nowadays there seems to be a weird hyperfixation on things like this in modern games, and while obviously not totally unwelcome, it seems to take precedence over the quality of the game. Let's take a look at what happened with Anthem, for example. This game is right in the sweet spot of what was supposed to be an absolute hit, but somehow it didn't take off the way it was supposed to. If you haven't heard of Anthem, to put it simply, it's a game where you hop in mech suits called javelins, and you get to fly around the world as you work your way through the next designated area for a fight against waves of enemies. This javelin can be configured in many shapes and forms, and it can be equipped with a couple different weapons and modifications to make you more efficient, depending on what playstyle you're going for. The gameplay loop is, as you defeat enemies, you come across loot that's even better than your previous stuff, and then rinse and repeat. It's simply put, a looter shooter. Before the game was released, it was quite hyped up. Especially the more and more information we got about it, it left players largely excited for the game to come out. The graphics, even to this day, looked outstanding, and even the way the world was portrayed visually was up there among the best. The gameplay even still holds up pretty well if you played it today, but of course, as you can almost expect at this point, the game was ultimately boring. Watching someone play this game for a few seconds will make it look like this game is fun, but after a while you'll start to realize that the story is pretty bland and they make you watch some of the parts you would rather play. The gameplay loop starts to fall flat as soon as the loot starts to come out, a little bit more few and far between, and the content was just so light that the game couldn't hold its audience for very long, considering how repetitive the missions started to get. Now, one might ask, how did this happen? How could a game with so much potential in every way end up like this? Well, it turns out BioWare simply had a hell of a time trying to bring this game across the finish line, which reminds me of a point I made earlier. It seems like it would be pretty difficult to get a whole team of people on the same page when it comes to making something so ambitious. I'm not certain we take that into consideration very often. The constant changing of members on the team, the changing of management, having to develop a third-person game in an engine that's designed for a first-person shooter, no real sense of what the game even was supposed to be well into development, and on top of that, you now have a deadline to meet where there are thousands waiting for you to finally reveal that one game as being the next big thing. Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying that developers should be allowed to get away with mediocre work or fundamentally ignore the consumer and what they'd like to experience. But it does leave me heartbroken to imagine that there can be situations where people do try their best and it ultimately doesn't pay off as expected. On the other end, however, far too often we have companies that try to put out poop and expect us to ask for seconds. I want to go over some of the ingredients that exist in those type of games and why they ruin them. I'm willing to bet that everyone from the casual mobile gamer to the avid tournament participant is starting to get fed up with some of the business practices that have found their way into modern gaming. This disdain towards certain companies and developers have shown that gamers are no longer willing to give in and take whatever's just pushed out to them. You can see this in the forms of many things, like people actively promoting against pre-ordering, comment sections of trailers and reviews by our previously beloved game journalists filled with controversy and memes. People nowadays simply do not trust initial impressions from early information and showcasings due to the fact that we have been fundamentally lied to time and time again. The gaming community no longer trusts those that provide us with the content we need to fuel our passion. Hell, it's even getting to the point to where there's no agreement amongst certain members of a games community, almost as if every single person is supposed to be pleased by each release. Video gaming has reached a state of vitriol where it feels like the negativity is purely for sport at this point. And if I'm being honest, it sucks. Unfortunately, it's impossible to look away from all of this as someone whose whole personality is based on certain video games that they play. And man, I gotta talk about some of the shit that's been going on. Starting with microtransactions. Microtransactions crashed on the scene in some of the most egregious forms. First time I remember microtransactions truly becoming something that was commonly hated across the community was when EA released the microtransaction system for Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, I don't think this was the first game to implement them in a terrible way, but it was for sure an uproar when players started to realize that they were getting fundamentally scammed. The game featured a system called the star card system. This is what players were supposed to use in order to upgrade their characters so that they would be more efficient in game. While the concept of the star card system in and of itself wasn't a bad idea, the problem more so came from the fact that players would have to earn more cards by grinding out the game, but would have to do so depending on sheer luck via loot boxes. This means that EA thought that they can get away with saying that everything in the game was earnable without having to spend money, while not necessarily false. It not only came across as dishonest, but it was just literally dishonest. Everyone knows that in most games, all abilities that would be upgraded should be a direct pathway or some sort of like skill tree to get to its fullest potential, not just hoping you would get the necessary item you would need in order to do so. This came across as dishonest because EA was basically designing the ability to upgrade around those loot boxes instead of just straight up earning them, thus meaning that players could and would likely have to suffer through hours of grinding just to keep getting the wrong upgrades, which would ultimately lead to one wanting to just pay for the currency with real money in order to buy the loot boxes and practically get more upgrades instantly, which fundamentally made the game pay to win. This not only killed the reward of being skilled and competitive at the game, but it also left a bad taste in players' mouths. It made the company look like they truly believed that the fan base that consisted of Star Wars fans of the Star Wars universe and FPS and Battlefield players were just ATM machines with no other value than just a way for them to meet the next sales quota. Don't even get me started on the fact that they tried to blur the price of purchasable in-game items using a currency conversion system. Now, look, I'm not sure this is a hot take, but I don't think people hate the idea of microtransactions. I personally don't mind buying a skin or two here and there, and honestly, the devs are allowed to set whatever price they value their work holds. It's just that companies don't seem to realize that this is a market, and while most people just pay for the microtransactions and get on with their day, the alternative is that the consumer may not like the price to value proposition and may not buy the product altogether. What makes this whole situation so convoluted is the fact that they've been used so maliciously ever since their conception. Gamers now naturally have a disdain for microtransactions in a game, thus making it more difficult to have a positive experience with the game that uses them. Players do not want microtransactions to be pay to win, nor do they want them to be way too overpriced and designed in a way that pretty much belittles their intelligence. If you were to Google the most downvoted comment on the internet, you get this. After a player makes a post stating, "Seriously, I paid 80 bucks to have Vader locked? This is a joke. I'll be contacting EA support for a refund. I can't even playing fucking Darth Vader? Disgusting." This age of microtransactions has gone way too far. Leave it to EA though to stretch the boundaries. EA responds with, "The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. As for cost, we selected initial values based upon the data of the open beta and other adjustments made to milestone rewards before launch. Among other things, we were looking at average per player credit earn rates on a daily basis, and we'll be making constant adjustments to ensure that players have challenges that are compelling, rewarding, and of course attainable via gameplay. We appreciate the candid feedback and the passion the community has put forth around the current topics here on Reddit, our forums, and across numerous social media outlets. Our team will continue to make changes and monitor community feedback and update everyone as soon and as often as we can." Out of every comment on Reddit, it's here where someone manages to take the cake at 600,000 downvotes, dog. It is the most downvoted post on the internet. Let that sink in. Next up, I want to say I have no clue how the woke mob worked its way into the gaming community, but that'd be like when I used to tell my mom I have no idea where my homework is. Ever since these people found their way in, some of our favorite series have started to get absolutely cooked to a point of like genuine concern. Like seriously, are devs okay? Is someone holding a fucking gun to the back of their heads? What the hell is going on? I just don't believe that game devs actually believe that all of this random activism was something that the majority of gamers would have wanted to see implemented in the medium they use to escape the harsh realities of life. And it's kind of funny because the agenda that's trying to be pushed was ultimately done more harm to the cause they think they're trying to support. Because most of the time, these themes are just forced in for the sake of being forced in, and literally not having anything to do with what goes on in gameplay mechanics or even the damn story. And that causes people to be absolutely filled with rage, and now they're given a target to point it at. Thanks a whole lot. I just simply want to boot up a game and have fun with it. Not get stuffed with all kinds of patronizing and overcompensation of some sort of inherited guilt that you have, especially when I'm the one who would have firsthand experience of what being black is like. And I just got done dealing with that in the real world. Like, what the actual fuck? And worst of all, I know I don't speak for everybody when I say this, but again, I don't think people actually care about there being topics like this brought up in their game. Woke messaging does actually have its place, and it can be massive if used properly. I'm not against learning about the plight of someone different than me through gaming, so long as it's done in a genuine and engaging way. But of course, people just want to profit off of tragic shit that people actually go through just for the sake of internet points and dollar signs. Let's take a look at Assassin's Creed Shadows.
A samurai, one that does not hail from these lands.
I am a stranger, yes, but you have nothing to fear from me.
I'm sorry, but as much as the game might not be that bad gameplay-wise, as a black person, I can't relate to the African dude set in feudal Japan fighting off waves of samurai, trained samurai, to a modern hip-hop beat. Hell, I'm sure African dudes can't even relate to that. I would rather be pleasantly surprised that they thought about such an obscure historical figure on like a side mission or something where we get to fight alongside Yasuke, but I want the opportunity to learn as much as, well, realistically possible in a video game about the history of my Japanese brothers across the globe, with some genuine respect to their culture. It's just such a weird choice when choosing what to force on people when it comes to inclusivity. Y'all saw how hard China went for Black Myth Wukong. That game's just straight up about their old Chinese story that they grew up with as they progressed through life. Also, going into this video, I wanted to bash on how they handled Frey from Forspoken. I was originally excited for the game because it looked really cool, but as reviews came out, we found out that she was absolutely insufferable. As I looked more into this character, a lot of varying opinions on her made me realize that she was more so miswritten. And that sucks because there seems to actually be people that found themselves somewhat relating to her, meaning the game could have been a great example of representation. And you kind of have to consider making a character generally likable if you're making a game with such high ambitions. My most recent memory of a likable, realistic, minority female lead was Alex Vance. No agenda, no weird gimmick to her personality. She was a regular schmegular person going through an absolutely bonkers universe, but they made her relatable enough that as a man, I didn't feel ostracized playing through the game with her as the protagonist, which brings me to another point. Virtual reality games. The virtual reality space is severely underutilized, and at one point I used to foolishly believe that VR could be the next big step in the gaming world. Half-Life Alyx fucked up my whole world because of how immersive and innovative the game made exploring a universe feel. You see, prior to this game's release, we did have some decent games to play and even mod to make them even better, like Skyrim VR, Fallout VR, Saints and Sinners, Pavlov, and VR Chat. But when Alyx came out, without any tinkering of game files, microtransactions, goofy promises, or modern gaming mechanics, this game was an absolute stunner. The game played smoothly and had a great story backed by some sound mechanics that were just translated so well in VR. They even took the time to pay attention to like minor details in the world, and it made exploring feel more like a please more than a checklist you have to do in order to progress through the game. Which is why now it is absolute torture being a fan of VR gaming, because there hasn't been quite anything else that has come close to how impactful that game was right out of the box. And I just don't know how to deal with the idea of knowing for a fact that a VR game can actually be a phenomenal experience, yet the major companies that could do something just as big are seemingly allergic to the VR space. And to top it off, they would rather produce arguably predictable slop than try something new with virtual reality. Could you imagine how immersive Battlefield could...
I'm getting fucked up the ass over here!
Actually, I don't want to imagine that. But who wouldn't be up for a properly done Pokemon adventure where you get to actually see the scale of certain Pokemon, and really feel the roar of the stadium as you're participating in a Pokemon championship. Imagine a Sims game where everything you built in your house is physically right in front of you, and that job you go to is like a simple mini game similar to the likes of Job Simulator. I don't even have to explain why something like Warhammer 40K or an officially supported D&D virtual tabletop would go insanely hard in VR. Microtransactions are starting to make a lot of sense here, aren't they? I have to admit though, I do realize that VR has its limitations, but man, that shouldn't stop us from innovating the space a little bit more and giving that area of the gaming world a good old try. There's so much fun that could be had there, and I still believe that more people could be convinced to try it out with some more interesting and recognizable titles. The next thing I want to talk about is the quality of games nowadays. Before I get started on this point, I do want to make a note that I understand that there's no way any game is just going to come out perfectly done. I mean, I don't think anyone expects something to come out flawless at this point. And to build on that, I saw a video by Alana Pierce recently that went over why so many games seem to be getting a 7 as like an average review score. Kind of brought something to my attention that I hadn't really accounted for, and I'm not certain most people do. Basically, most games that come out are pretty much garbage, and it's only those somewhat profound ones that seem to breach the surface sort of as like a fodder for the gaming space until some of the more like notable releases come out. And the scale at which most games are being graded on are taking that into consideration. For example, if you were to go to Steam at any given point, you'll see tons and tons of games that are just now coming out, coming soon, or have been out for about a week or so. But if you actually hone in on what these games have to offer and just scroll through them for about 15 minutes, you'd find everything would seem rather amusing. You'll see that amongst all these random ass games, you can find some obviously recognizable titles like Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster and God of War Ragnarok. What you'll also see, however, is a lot of games you had no clue were coming out or even existed. What the fuck is Deep Sea Pursuit, and why the fuck is it $199? I mean, surely this is one of those quadruple A games Ubisoft has been telling us we need to get ready to never be able to own after we buy it, right? This game looks like something you would make from like a YouTube tutorial or something that teaches you the fundamentals on how to make a video game. Except there's no real theme here. You can tell they didn't even try to make the game any more interesting than watching paint dry. Like, seriously, I could buy a whole couple gallons of paint for less than this, and a brush, and just walk around like dabbing random spots around my apartment and just watch them dry. And that would cost significantly less than this game. Okay, maybe if I keep looking, I can find, oh, look, Cowgirls Cafe. Looks fun, what's this? Holy shit. Okay, wait, surely if I scroll back up. Here we go, Catbox. Don't look so bad, the UI is cute and everything is readable, organized. It's pretty much a cat jigsaw puzzle game with a nice cozy theme for you to sit back and relax while you're playing. Oh, look at the cute little kitties, and look how clever they made their poses look like shapes so you can solve the puzzles. This game must be protected at all costs. Now you should be able to see the vast difference in possible outcomes when it comes to the type of games that get released on a daily basis versus what were usually advertised. And to follow up, considering how horribly this next game was perceived, it is absolutely bizarre when you first hear Concord got a 7 for IGM, for example. Like, what the fuck? The game didn't even break 1,000 concurrent players on Steam. How could that be possible? Well, if we're being honest with ourselves here, Concord was a visually impressive game from a technical standpoint, and the game looked as though it wasn't too hard to play because there were some kind of like technical issues holding it back. Its biggest flaws were just that it cost way more than the consumer felt it was worth, and the characters were just yet another case of the players not being considered as more than money bags and that they must be told how to feel. I mean, look at these god-awful designs. What the fuck were they thinking? Except this guy. This guy's kind of cool. And to get slightly off topic, these are things that probably wouldn't have been a problem if the game was just free or the characters were sexy AF. Overwatch is similar in nature and has got to know this would be their same fate if the characters didn't have so much fan service. Overwatch looks good, it has style, plays well, so why isn't that flopping just like Concord? Fan service. I personally think this points to an idea that we might spend too much time focusing on the negative aspects on games that could be considered technical marvels considering how horribly things can turn out. Not Concord, fuck that game. And hold on before you go grabbing your pitchforks and... Bro, is that a katana? Jesus Christ, relax. This doesn't mean that devs are allowed to get away with putting out something uninteresting. It It's just that there's so much work and talent getting put into a lot of these major releases. Why let it all go to waste? There was love and passion put into our favorite franchises before, so much so that these days there are large amounts of remastered games that we would have otherwise played time and time again just fine on their original consoles, and it's just kind of scratching at a lot of the fan bases in a weird way. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that remasters are a great way to introduce players into a series that they may not have had the chance to play before. And we aren't all boomers and millennials and Gen Z. Not everybody got to grow up and play all of these epic games when they first came out. And the old school mechanics and graphics might be rather off-putting considering today's standards. But it kind of says something when, in every single aspect except one, games have drastically improved. Yet we're being directed back to games that, in all honesty, we don't need to get brought back at this time. It sort of feels like they're only doing it because they aren't willing to dig deep and put that effort into something fresh or just an addition to a current series. Which brings me back to something I hinted at a second ago. Most of the games that are absolute pitfalls all seem to fail at replicating one major thing that exists in all great games. They lack a connection to the player. And as cheesy as it might sound, that is the lifeblood of gaming. No amount of poor design, downgrades, unfinished games, or even repetitive releases seem to stop the people from being smitten by games that are at the peak of the gaming world. And players seem to love these creations because the devs did something that resonated with the person playing. Majora's Mask is just a remixed and rushed redo of Ocarina of Time, but it did a great job at having the player feel like they were on a whole new adventure with quite literally the exact same assets. Skyrim has been released about 11 times and the game is jank personified, but the way you got to interact with this world and its inhabitants has players buying every version and would probably still buy it if they made another edition. Please don't actually do that, Bethesda, we need you to fix Starfield. Even Fallout is now an award-winning TV show. Huh. Go figure. You'd think yearly sports games would have gone belly up by now. They are literally the same fucking game every year. Nope, still thugging it out. Well, on consoles at least. The Sims 4 is pretty much just a pile of microtransactions at this point. Surely such debauchery would... I just want to point out that although it seems like things are way worse than they actually are at times, I truly believe that majority of people in the gaming space just want the same thing. To have fun playing video games, and the devs want to have fun making video games. And the future of this community rests within our capability to find common ground on what we want out of it. We can place the blame on the scummy business practices of these companies all we want, but they aren't going to stop until more and more people get one simple concept. Vote with your wallet. I've been hearing this phrase a lot lately, and out of all the movements and trending hashtags I've seen over the years, this is the one I feel I have an obligation to join the fray on. Gaming companies do not deserve a single cent if they aren't willing to continue building a trustworthy relationship with the players. Getting real tired of the whole modern audience trend that's been going on as of late, because it shows how disconnected they have gotten from the actual people that bolstered the gaming scene to begin with. It's just so damn confusing to witness some of this false sense of excitement and these statements being made as a couple of buzzwords are just gonna magically make people interested in something. Especially when the blueprint to success has been laid out in such plain sight, and even more so considering the fact that you have players now actually able to respond on the very platforms you release your games to. The modern audience is literally just the same people it has been since the beginning, but now it's mixed with people who simply weren't a part of the community in its earlier stages. And that's all fine. I truly believe that most new people are generally welcome to the gaming scene. It's just that nobody likes the overcompensation for something that the vast majority is not asking for. It's gotten so bad that it's just getting in the way of some potentially good titles. And any true gamer just wants to play good games, regardless of which story you're trying to tell. That's it. Frankly, I don't think companies have been able to see that until now. We've started to get past that stage of constant bickering amongst ourselves and blaming each other for not liking certain parts of a game, and we realize that winter is coming. If we don't put our money where our mouth is, we'll never be taken seriously. Take a look at the Helldivers 2 situation. When the game came out, players went absolutely apeshit over the release of this bad boy, especially considering the fact that it was nowhere near the popularity as where it is now. Shame on me for not listening to the homie when he tried to get me to play the first game. They had players all across the planet crying for liberty and democracy. The game was just such a breath of fresh air because it felt like a development company finally delivered on exactly what players have been itching to experience. A game where you could boot it up and be dropped right into some insanely addicting gameplay and such a seamless loot, and you would do it having fun with some of the boys and even the randos you came across. Oh, it was just chef's kiss. Everything in the game being earnable and selectable, you get to pick what you wanted too, and all of this would happen sort of passively as you're playing the game. Oh, God, the way each different weapon felt and made different approaches actually viable and worth experimenting with. The stratagems were ever so glorious no matter how many times you've seen them, and the devs working relentlessly and closely with the players, continuing to tweak the experience to the best it could possibly be, was fucking peak gaming. I never stopped wanting to play, even during the first big controversy PlayStation caused the game to go through, despite what the internet was saying. It just got sort of interesting to see what has happened after, leading to today. Certain players started whining about other players not using their meta builds, and of course, with them coming off the heels of something so shell-shocking, the devs were a little worried that they might lose their glorious baby. They actually fucked around and found out by catering to this part of the fan base, and it turned people off to it due to the response being constant nerfs and some of the community leaders even being pricks to the fans. But if you look at the big picture, this whole situation is actually a good sign of what the gaming community could be. Because those absolute chads over at Arrowhead Games never gave up on us. They saw that people weren't happy with the games. They felt the fan base's disappointment after so much prosperity and triumph as a whole. Even with the looming threat of being replaced by a similar game in the genre, Space Marine 2, they have shown that they want the same thing that we all do. Great games. Understand this. People are going to make mistakes along the way, and sometimes all it takes is to admit that and make the effort to move forward in the right direction. And now, we are so back. And you know what? I've got yet another bone to pick with these damn Fuck that.
Ava Vargo!
Gaming has been a huge component of my life, and I'm sure it has impacted yours as well. I feel as though I owe a lot to video games, with the respect to those around me, of course. Those days I wasn't feeling as confident about where my life was heading. I had Link there to fill me with courage and remind me to face my problems head on and win. When my family had get-togethers, all of my cousins and brothers would get together and play Madden or NBA Live at the time, and talk all kinds of crazy shit to each other, but it was my favorite way to bond with them. Watching my girlfriend absolutely blaze through all of the newest Pokemon releases, no matter how unsavory they were compared to their predecessors, made me feel like I wasn't just some geeky guy she's dating and couldn't understand why her man does nothing but play video games all day. And I could care less what an outsider thinks about our passion too. And for those who don't really understand our passion for video games, I'd love to see if I can find something suitable for them to get them addicted, because gaming is just so vast and it has the potential to hold every single person in its grasp. I feel we can take this wonderful thing that we have to limitless heights together. This means that the relationship between creator and consumer must be endorsed by all parties included. We clearly seem to get more done where we hit them where it hurts and that pocket starts to feel a little light. It's worth noting that it has become a very interesting experience witnessing how the gaming community has showed up and showed out at every possible turn of events. And I hope that we can keep that spirit amongst ourselves and use it for the right purposes. Don't lose the joy of your favorite hobby over how the internet tells you how to feel about it. You'll grow fonder the more you realize what it means to you, and that's something nobody can take away. Which means your own personal experience is all that will remain when you take a look at what's actually going on around you. And that remains true in real life. So for the future of gaming, I'm excited to see where we go from here. And I hope you are too. This has been another Skill Issue Joint, and if you made it this far, thanks. This video took a hot minute to make, and if you enjoyed it, consider leaving us a like. If you want to see what we have in store going forward, you can hit that subby-wubby and turn on the notification bell as well. Also, let us know what has been your favorite experience with video games in the comments down below, and if you want to chat it up a little further with others, feel free to join our Discord and do so. See ya, Samurai!